Out to our event today. Pantheon Music is going to host Caleb May. For all those who are here and for all those who are watching online, my name is Martin Hansen. I will be your host today. We are thrilled to obviously bring in Mr. Caleb. Stop going in the way. Okay, a good friend of mine and a colleague from Guitar Center. We're both instructors at. Myself been doing pro audio and home recording and DJing, and Caleb doing instrumentation, basically anything with a string. Anything with a string. Is your mic on? Okay. All right. So questions are welcome from both our studio audience and from those watching at home. If you are here in the audience, please make sure to raise your hand. We will have a microphone that will be coming to you. Please wait for the microphone to get to you, so then that way the people at home can actually hear your questions. And for those watching at home, you are more than welcome to ask questions online. And from there, we do have somebody that will be moderating the online questions. What's your name? Christian. Okay, Christian will be moderating our online questions. And the same thing there. We are running a little bit behind, and we do apologize that, but we can't foresee problems like an I being the same shape as a little L, which is what was actually stopping our stream, because they both look identical on screen. Anyways, but we do have that fixed. Starting this time around, we are also going to be trying to do a 5-minute intermission. So about halfway through, we'll stop and allow people to get up, we'll go to the bathroom, go get something to eat. In that time, you're also welcome to go to our Patreon page. That is www.patreon.com/Patreon Music Patreon and Pantheon are very difficult to say in the same sentence. So it's patreon.com/Pantheon Music Academy. We are accepting donations there, and for those who are actually here, there is a donation jar in the back. Donations are not required, but they are greatly appreciated. So, without further ado, Caleb May. We are here with over 12 years of music experience in both music education. Caleb has shared the stage with the likes of Hank Williams Jr. and worked in the studio with people like Arian Foster, aka Bobby Fino. Caleb is also an Academy for Music Education nationally certified music instructor in bass guitar, violin, ukulele, and mandolin, which is why I've always said if you're looking for an instructor with a string, this is your guy. This has allowed him to be an instructor for both Craig Biggio, Roger Clemens, Mario Williams. So for those of sports fans out there, he is kind of the guitar guru for the sports people here in Houston. And let's see. This is Okay, he is also currently working on an album with his band called the Docs, which is now the fourth album that you guys have together. Fourth album that you guys have together. And today we have asked Caleb here to talk on a subject which mystifies me greatly, even though I've been in production for quite some time. While I do know how to create chords and how to run chord progression, the application of this skill is still a little rusty for me. And it really is the basis and critical for making good music, especially if you want to do it fast. You know, if you understand what you're going to do or what the next chords that you need to play are, it makes the process of doing this a little bit faster. So, Caleb, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and take it away.
All right, so yeah, I'm Caleb. I've been doing music for about 12 years, and really I kind of why we're here is for a long time try to just make music come out almost like a sneeze, you know, is just try to force my fingertips to do something on the MIDI keyboard, hope that it sounded good, and I didn't really ever have a plan, and I didn't know how to create a plan either for a long time. And so some of what he'll pull up here is just some of the things that I started learning that I felt like took me out of the dark, kind of shed some light on how to actually create real music with the why to the what. Right? And so a lot of it takes a little time. If you go ahead, click over to that next slide real quick. This is probably the most important part here. What I was told in music school was some of what you're going to learn tonight is going to be caught over time versus just taught in one session. It's going to take some practice. You're probably going to mess up, probably going to forget some of the stuff that we go over because it's can be incredibly complex. It can be very simple at the end of the day, but just go slow, learn one step at a time. And as we go through this, feel free to ask questions, because I'm sure there will be some. The 3 Ps, practice, patience, and persistence, something that you really have to try to apply when going through this kind of format. Not all music is just going to happen because we want it to. Sometimes you have to kind of fight through those creative blocks, and having a game plan of some kind, of any kind, is huge. It's absolutely critical. So I'm going to move through here. All music, in music theory, this is kind of the backbone of the why we're talking about. The what is the MIDI keyboard, it's Ableton, it's whatever you're using, but adding some depth to what you are doing, and kind of helping that shed light on what you're trying to understand, what kind of chords you're trying to put together, what kind of sounds I want to create. By having that information at the get-go, I can affect the mood from the very beginning. If I know I want to write kind of a darker sounding song, I know exactly what kind of chords, arpeggios, scales I need to use, that kind of thing. But it all comes down right up here to the major scale. If you've seen The Sound of Music, you've heard the do, dear, you know, all that stuff. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It's the backbone of all music. Anything that Beethoven made, all the way to stuff that people are making now, at one point or another will boil back down to this scale. The do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now, the major scale, thank goodness for us, has a formula that's not ever going to change. It's not going to surprise you or trick you or anything like that. Stays the same, and it's made out of what we call intervals, which is distances between any given 2 notes, whether it's there's intervals that we use to describe how far we're traveling from one spot to the next. So basically the simplest forms, or the W's, represent whole steps, and the H's are half steps. So if you've seen like on a piano, if you start on like a white key and go to the very next available black key, white to black, that's a half step. I add another half, black key back to white key, 2 halves make a whole. It's simple math. But we have what we call from the C a whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and that's going to create the major scale. That never changes. You can apply it to any key on the keyboard, and if you know those intervals, you can always find where you're at. You can always find where you want to go. That's the simple part. And it's just making sure that you apply that over and over and over again. So, with that being said, everything inside of the structure of the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, we can build chords and scales, and we'll use that to create a particular sound. There's going to be minor sounds, major sounds, diminished sounds. There are all these different things that we're going to use to describe what we're trying to do. A chord is a collection of those notes played at the same moment in time, right? Scale is just one after another. And so once you understand that difference, they're made out of the same ingredients, but they're just displaced over linear time differently. That's the huge part that kind of shed light for me at the very beginning, was it's always made out of the same stuff. You just got to figure out how to apply it, either all at once or one at a time. And we can do things to make things match. We can create dissonance. You know, if I want to create something that does not necessarily sound great together, creates a little tension. I want to hear is what my mind wants to hear, but I can purposefully create tension if I know where I'm going. So I can affect the mood, I can affect the direction of whatever I'm trying to do with this. So make a plan. That's the next part. What we're going to talk about in the next coming slides is just general chords, scales, what those are, how they work, and then this last part. Not all music will come from inspiration alone. I've written well over 500 songs in my career, some of which have been on the radio, some of which have been in commercials, sampled stuff on other people's music. Sometimes it didn't just come out. Sometimes we had to sit down and like map out an idea on paper first, and then go back and fill in the blanks and figure out what we're going to do about it. So here we go. Scales, if I start taking the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do pattern that we talked about and start putting numbers behind those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's going to describe what I call an octave of music. So So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 different notes. The pattern is always going to start over. So if I start on that number 1 note, number 8, it's always going to be the same thing. So understanding the boundaries of where I'm traveling and how I'm getting there is going to be super important. Now, after a while, you'll start to see scales that use some white keys and some black keys, and it comes down to that whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half pattern we talked about. And basically, the black and white keys are just your A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now, the tricky part about the black keys is each one of them have 2 names. So, are we able to do the view of the keyboard?
Sure, absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so if I go up to the first black key next to C, if I'm increasing the pitch, I would call that note C sharp. But I can also reach that note going backwards from D, which I would call D flat. So understanding each one of those black keys is going to have 2 names. That's going to be super important later on when we're starting to look at scales that move into different keys. You'll see some that have the little hashtag symbols, and some there's not a key for that, but it looks like a little B. So those are our flat signs. Those are going to be very important to watch for. There's just an example. Every 8 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, is going to start that pattern over again. Now, one thing that I always do is I tend to start, my strong point is guitar. So I'll always pick up a guitar and kind of play around with some scales. Y'all may have heard me kind of picking around earlier, but I'll start with a simple idea of a scale. Let me turn this off. That's exactly what's up on the board. But I can take that scale and start to manipulate it. And so whenever I'm like playing around on the MIDI keyboard or playing around on the guitar, I just start with an idea. I start with some kind of boundary that gives me a plan. It's really simple. You should do this until you're kind of foaming at the mouth with insanity. Just keep doing it over and over and over again. And once you get the idea of how it works, it's all reiterations of the same exact stuff. Always comes back down to the major scale, which earlier had a formula. You can look it up online. And then every 8 notes, that pattern of the formula you're playing is going to start over. So it just continues on the MIDI keyboard, the right direction for infinity and the left direction for infinity on a technical level. So, let me see. There we go. Now, basically, modes. This is a huge part of affecting sound. If you have like what you want to be an exotic kind of sound, I can take like that sounds like my teacher telling me to sit on the floor crisscross applesauce. You know, it's very elementary in nature. But if I start to take that pattern and shuffle up the notes that I start and end on, go to that next slide real quick. I create what I call modes. And these have weird names. They come from Greek, but Ionian is exactly what I was playing. It's also known as the major scale. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Once I start to move, you notice it's the same notes. I just start and end on different points within that scale. So a Dorian mode would tell me, okay, I'm playing a C major scale. I'm just not starting on the C note. I'm going to use the D note instead and use that. And so that sounds different then. It has a little bit of a different sound. And so I can create different moods, different feelings behind that, depending on what mode I'm using. And so Ionian is just your typical major scale. And later we're going to learn an important one, Aeolian. This is like your relative minor. We're going to be familiar with that term here in a little while. But if I ever start in a key with C major, I'm always in the back of my mind going to look for this Aeolian mode, and I'll explain why in just a little bit. But every major scale that we're talking about, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, has a twin somewhere, a minor twin out there. And so it's important to know where to find it, because having a backup plan is good. We talked about making a first plan earlier, but what if that doesn't work, right? Do we turn off the computer, call it a day? Try a different position. go to a different spot, and the next best spot is going to be this Aeolian mode. So it always matches. If I do C major, it always sounds good together. They fit each other like gloves. What's up?
Oh no, I was going to say that those are actually the two that I remember the most because they are the white keys on the keyboard.
Yep.
So if you start at the letter A and then work your way up, you hit all the white keys, which will give you a minor scale. And then if you start with the C, you'll hit the major scale, all the white keys. So you're playing literally exactly the same notes. You're just playing them out of order.
Yep, and shuffling them around. It's like a deck of cards. It's always made out of the same grouping of cards. Each time we shuffle it, we get a different result if we pass them out. So we're going to go over these in a little bit more detail later on. If we go to the next slide here. When you learn your keys, you're going to see all these different modes, all these different letters you have to memorize and stuff, and it looks like a lot. But over time, this took me a little while to memorize as well, but it is literally, it's kind of like the Northern Star. In any given key that I'm playing music in, I always know different spots that I can go. If I try my first original plan, that doesn't work, I can go to another position, make up a new plan, call the shots kind of as I'm going. So now, basically, when we're on, a lot of us use MIDI of some sort. So like when we're on MIDI, outside of using like regular kind of vanilla chords, basically what I'll do is create extensions, experiment with chords, and then know how these chords are mapped together. So each one of these positions, we talked earlier, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Each one of those positions is going to represent a different kind of chord that you're going to play in that key. So basically, number 1 in a major key is always a major chord. Number 2, however, is always a minor chord. It's always going to have kind of a darker, ominous, mysterious kind of sound. And so I can play with those ideas on if I need something that sounds darker and more mysterious, I'm going to want to use a grouping of minor chords. If I need something that's uplifting and kind of happy sounding, I'm going to use a bunch of major chords. It's pretty simple as far as that goes. Just pair your mood with major or minor to start with. Happy, sad, more or less.
Okay, now I was only going to add that the chord that you're playing there is a 1-3, 1-3-5.
Yeah, we'll go to that. It's actually on that next slide. Click that next slide real quick. So the ones we're going to pay attention to are major, the top one. Basically, whenever I'm in the key of C major, you hear that it's made out of a 1-3-5. What does that mean? Well, go back to the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We said we were going to give those numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 1, 3, and 5. Do, mi, sol. That's what a major chord's made out of. Whenever I look at the minor chord, it's the fourth one down. It's going to be where we're starting to see those little B's over there. That's like the formula for each kind of chord, the flat 3. And basically, D, F, A is going to create that minor, sad, dark sound. So knowing how to achieve those different results, something like that, that far left or far right column that says intervals, that thing is super important to memorize over time. If you want to take a picture of it or write them down or something, that is kind of like a recipe book for any chord that you'll ever need if you're trying to get or achieve a specific sound. So one thing I'll do, like, let me go up here. Okay, so if I start with some chords, just something simple, typically what I'll do is sit with the piano in my right hand and just and noodle out ideas. Try to get a sense of what the next thing that I would love for you guys to pay attention to is phrasing, is figuring out basically how it's kind of like musical sentences. How do I choose to construct my words whenever I speak? Same thing on guitar. I can take a scale. I just play the notes, but if I take that same scale, I now decorated those words with a little bit more, you know, flair. Versus I can arrange them a million different ways by using inflections, using bends, or on your MIDI, using the mod or the pitch bend.
It may not be connected.
It may not be connected. But yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The pitch bend is going to be a great way where you can start to bend some of those notes around and move the pitches up and down depending on what you're feeling for that song. But yeah, outside of that, I'll simply start with an idea and then try to come up with something catchy and repetitive. So inside of that scale, I'll come up with something that I can play 4 or 5 times. It's the same thing. Use that as a backing track or some kind of backbone for what I'm writing, and then go back and then put some MIDI in over it, put some sort of sound effect over it. But create a phrase, create some kind of theme song for what it is you're playing.
When you say a phrase, what do you mean? Like a collection of notes?
A collection of notes that make sense, you know.
Generally, how long is a phrase?
It depends on the style of music you're playing. A lot of times, like traditional jazz or traditional pop, things like that will be a 4 count or an 8 count, right? Okay. Just 1, 2, 3, 4 in that space. That's my phrase. You know, I have that amount of time. Sometimes you can do an 8 count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Okay. And so what you're doing right there is you're actually moving the notes around in the scales using your different intervals.
Exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, trying to come up with something that would get stuck in somebody's head one way or another. You know, I play a lot of rock and roll, I do some jazz, things like that. So that's kind of my style. But for your style, what do you feel like would get completely stuck in somebody's head, and then embellish on it over and over again? And so something, yeah, that I'll do is like a... I can go back and repeat that if I want to. Play the exact same thing, and that's important here on the MIDI too. Whatever you're going to be playing, play it so much that you could go back at a moment's notice and play it again, and play it again, and play it again, and create that phrase or that sentence that we're talking about that kind of becomes the theme song or the backbone. Kit Kat, give me a break. Give me a break. The phrasing, right? So it kind of identifies. Even if I took the words out, da 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 da, you could recognize it.
So a lot. I think the easiest way to understand this is to do a descending scale in a C major chord. And if we were to do that, right? But if I change it,
right,
now
there you
it's
go.
Joy to the world, right? So
That's
a lot of
the
that
phrase,
is the spacing between the notes. So instead of playing it all in one go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can pull the notes forward or backward a little bit in time, or hold the note and then be able to create the phrase from it. So, yeah.
No, that was a perfect example. That's a perfect example. Everybody knows what that is, even if you don't like the song. You know, like, you know what that is.
Who doesn't like Joy to the World?
And that's the phrase. That's kind of the backbone or the theme behind the entire thing. Or everybody knows that, right? I don't even have to play the rest of it, and you know what I'm playing. That's Beethoven.
So I guess the very important thing would be to obviously understand what scale that you're playing in, right? So what collection of 8 notes that you're going to be playing together. From then understand what the intervals are between those notes, whether you're playing a 1, 3, 5, and if you count those as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then from there, understanding that there are relationships between those notes and other scales, but that you can use the same notes. And I think what happens a lot of times, especially if somebody's playing MIDI, is they'll play something, they'll go, oh man, that sounds really cool, but then it gets boring. You play it a couple of times, you repeat it, especially if you've got it in a loop and you're working on another part of the song, you might keep listening to it again, and it gets boring. So what you have to do is you have to come up with different ways of changing the notes around, so then that way they don't sound boring, or they don't get boring eventually. So some of that could come in the spacing, like the way we did Joy to the World, where we worked it backwards, whereas a descending scale, but we changed the timing of it a little bit. Another thing that you could also do is look at other modes or other ways of playing those same notes, right? That will then make it sound either, like you said, the modes will change, whether it's like it feels happy or whether it feels sad. So major scales are always going to feel happy, minor scales are always going to feel sad. So you can kind of fluctuate between emotions as you're actually playing.
Yeah, that's it exactly, without breaking the key. You know, like you can stay in the same general idea.
Can we do something where you play something and then you play a note out of key and we can hear the dissonance?
Sure, yeah. So even if I were to play like a... That's,
oh boy, that sounds
very
terrible.
much out of key. It's very easy to hear. But once we're in key, we hear the resonance. Basically, resonance is where that music resonates, where it comes together. It kind of gives you that ah feeling. But that does not give me an ah feeling, right? That's kind of a very, what you would call, dissonant note. Creates dissonance, tension, like we were kind of talking about earlier.
And a lot of this has to do with the harmonics of the sound envelope itself. So there's a formula called T = 1 over F. T is the length of the wave, 1 is the speed of sound, which is 1,130 feet per second, and then the F is actually the frequency that you plug into it, right? So if I'm looking at 100 hertz and I plug that into that formula, that's going to give me a wavelength of about 11.3 feet, which means it's going to take the wave that long to complete. Now, what makes harmonics sound like they're in harmony together is that you have equal intervals of those waves that fit into the other sides of the wave, right? So if I have something that's 100 hertz and I know that it's 11.3 feet, I'm looking for the half of that to find the next octave up, right? So if I go from, let's say, those notes relatively have the same feel to them, even though they're 1 octave up. Why? Because they're exactly, one is half as long or the other one is twice as long as the note before. And that would be the octave up, or 1 octave up. So for us, that's 8 notes, right? But if we play those, they both feel pretty much the same. So there's other relationships, like you could have a wave that fits 3 times into a wave, right? Which would be the third up. And those still sound nice together, right? So that's where the basics of harmony and what we're doing here, as far as how you put the scales together and why they sound that way. From there, progression.
Yeah.
How do we move the notes?
Right. So that's going to be on the next slide. This gives you kind of like a bird's eye view of what you see on like a regular MIDI controller if you have the piano style MIDI controller. These are all the chords that are inside of just the simple key of C. We're going to use those just to keep it really easy. There's no sharps and flats, the hashtags or the little B's in this thing. It's just all white keys all the way across, nothing confusing. Now, you'll notice that, I guess the question we're going to answer later on is, like, if I'm in a major key, why do I have minor chords and diminished chords? Shouldn't they all be major, right? We're going to kind of dig through some of that and why are some of minor chords involved with major keys, right? We're going to figure that out in a little bit. But basically, yeah, what I'm playing here, the C, E, G, D, F, A, E, G, B, F, A, C, G, B, D, A, C, E, and then B, D, F will get me back to C, E, G. And so this right here are just your regular 1, 3, 5 chords that we were talking about, if the do, mi, so chords. If I went back to the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Over here, this is kind of where I exist a lot, are going to be 7 chords, where I had the 1, 3, 5, and then add this little 7. Sounds a little classier to me. But yeah, I kind of like that sort of open, ambient sort of noise behind the chords. Just provides like a jazzy feel. I like that vibe for me. So I'm always using something like a 7th chord. And that's a 1, 3, 5, 7. 7th chords. And so this map, if y'all want to take a picture of that, that is super helpful just to kind of planning out your first game plan for, like, all right, I'm in the key of C. Here's the boundaries, the walls of my house. Now I can decorate these walls any ways that I choose, right? So all you have to do is go through memorize these things, and then try out different combinations of them. They'll all work together. They're all part of the exact same thing. So now you just have to go through and figure out which ones you want to put together. All right. So the next part that people really take for granted are what we call chord inversions. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about of shuffling up notes, right? I can take, for example, sounded like I played 4 different chords, right? But really I just took a C major chord and shuffled the notes up. If I take, we're just looking at that first row all the way across. If I take C, E, G, I can get different voicings of the same C chord. Just play C, E, G, C being the lowest note is what I call my root position. If I go up to where I throw the C over the top to the next octave, like he was talking about, I have E, G, C, which is still C major, but it sounds a little bit different. Listen to that again. Slightly different. You can play with that. It's kind of like we all in here are speaking English, but we each have different tones of voice when we talk. It's kind of that same idea. So if you want a deeper resonant sound, you can throw the C way down low. If you want a higher pitch sound, you can throw the C way up high. So same thing is true with any chord that you play. You can actually flip-flop the order that they show up in. It's kind of just like shuffling a deck of cards. I can throw them around. C, E, G, E, G, C, G, C, E, and then it'll get me back to C, E, G again. So that is one thing that when I learned that was huge for me, because I was always just stuck playing like the same C chord all the time, amen, you know, sort of deal. And that got old. And so I learned different ways to play the C chord, where I could use a fancier sound if I wanted to.
Now, I think the important thing here, and the reason why they sound different, is because of the fact that you have the root note.
Well,
right?
yeah, I'm moving
it
to a different spot.
Right, so the root note is always going to be the one that's to the left, or the one that has the
furthest one that way, typically.
Wave, right? So
right.
The one that's got the largest wave. So the reason that, so the fact that it has the largest wave, it actually has the most amount of energy of any of the other ones, which is why it kind of colors the other two slightly differently. So even though you're playing exactly like you said, the same 3 notes, you're always playing C, E, and G, but because one is on the lower, or it is the bottom one, the one that you play on your one finger, it will then color the other sounds because of the phase relationship between the 3 waves, between the 3 notes that are being played. So E, play an E by say C by itself.
Oh, C?
Yeah, and then play an E by itself.
Oh, sorry. C, then E.
Then G. Right? And now do the same thing, but start with, play these, but as individual notes.
And then the last one.
And in combination, the lower of those notes is going to be the kind of like the carrier wave that the other ones kind of ride on top of. And because of that, their phase relation. Now, what phase relationship is if I have 2 notes that are playing, or 2 sounds that are playing at exactly the same time, the way they interact with each other changes the way that sound is. So if I'm speaking and I have somebody else speaking with me, it might be difficult to listen to both of us at the same time, because both of us are talking to you, so your brain has to decipher, and both of those are being mixed in the air as they reach your ear. So it is a little bit difficult to hear it. But here, because they're in harmony with each other, because they're all related, all the notes are related, they actually sound better together, and they change the quality of each one of the as they progress up or down, which is fantastic, because like he said, it not only allows you to play the same note and stay within the same scale, but it also changes it a little bit, right? It changes the quality of the sound, so it doesn't sound boring. It keeps it interesting, because in music it's always that delicate balance between keeping things, having good repetition, which keeps people into the music, while creating change in the music, which keeps them interested. Otherwise they get real bored, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, subconsciously, each time we play one of those chords, even if we're shuffling up the notes, we're still, like, our subconscious is trying to find that note wherever it is. So even if I'm shuffling up those chords, it's still trying to find that C to complete that idea. And so whenever you're playing music, yeah, it's a huge, weird psychological pattern of kind of always finding this area of completion with phrases, like sentences like we talked about in music, or even just like shuffling some notes around inside of a chord. We're always listening for that. One that I learned this concept with was this one right here. Little jazz for you. But basically, there's a chord on the other side of that I want to hear. That doesn't complete the idea. If I were to just start or end on that chord, it kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth. My mind is already hearing that chord on the other side of it. So whenever I go back through that progression, if I were to start a song with this chord and go, hey guys, I'm Caleb, and hit that chord, y'all are going to be really curious as to what I'm about to do. But if I start moving through those chords and completing those ideas where I get that sort of resonant sound, it makes so much more sense.
I think that goes back to something fundamental in music, that you almost like you're asking a question and then you need a response to that question, and you have to resolve the notes.
Exactly. This is a musical question, and this is the musical answer. It's exactly that idea. Yeah, and I mean they're just related to one another through the same key, but I'm just using a specific chord that I know creates tension. Once I learn those chords, one of the ones, can you go one slide previous? This guy right here, the diminished chord down at the bottom, if you want some good tension, that's going to be the chord you're going to want to learn. I'm playing a diminished chord here, and then on the other side of it, I go back to the beginning where the whole thing began, and then that's where it alleviates all of that sort of suspense or pain, if you will. It kind of, like he said, it's the question and then the answer. Yep, exactly. Go ahead and go backward. So yeah, that chart right there, any chord that you learn, like if you're holding a position, look at what notes those are, and then just take this highest one or the furthest one to the left and find the next available one on the right of where your current hand position is and readjust. And you've done a chord inversion, and keep doing that. You can cycle those over, even if you don't know what you're playing. Hit a chord, look at where you're playing, take the note furthest to the left, throw it furthest to the right, and then keep doing that pattern, and you're inverting or shuffling those chords. Pretty simple. All right, let's go. So this is the next thing, putting it on the MIDI controller like we saw on the last page, understanding the pattern, the 2 black keys, the 3 black keys, the 2 black keys, the 3 black keys, so on and so forth, forever and ever and ever, ever. So it'll help keep track of where you are. It'll help you find those areas where you're trying to shuffle things around or move a note from here over to the next one available over here. If I'm in a cluster of the 2 black keys, I'm not going to want to go to the area where there's 3 black keys. I want to put it on the next available grouping of the 2 black keys to get that shuffling inverted effect. So let me see. Oh yeah, now the last one we're going to go into here in just a second is knowing how from any given note how to construct a major chord, a minor chord, and that tensiony diminished chord. That one's going to be an important one. All right, go ahead. Now this is what we were talking about earlier. I was saying each do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, the major scale, has a minor that it's related to. And I'm going to do the little pin thing here in just a second if we can. Write out some extra little notes on there. Is there any way to do the all white screen? Boom. Okay. So if I have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. Whoa. Yeah, that's a long E. Notes keep going left and right for infinity technically, so you can kind of figure out oh, is it not up there?
Should be through the projector. Is it just oh, you know what, it's not going through the second screen because we have it on a dual, but it should be getting okay. Jose, can you see this on your screen? You can't see him writing?
Okay, well, if that doesn't work, that's all good. So basically, whenever I have a certain grouping of the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, when I get to the 6th position of any major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it creates the minor scale that's naturally buried inside of this major scale, is why it's called the natural minor. This visual will be really helpful if we can get it, but if not, there we go. But nevertheless, every major has a minor it's related to, and I kind of like to think of it like musical twins. Even whenever you meet a set of twins in real life, you recognize them as two separate people, but under a microscope they contain 100% identical DNA, right? We couldn't tell them apart underneath a microscope, but we can face to face. Same thing is true with these two scales. They're kind of like twins. They're made out of the exact same materials, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's one of those things when I play, I'll always think C major and A minor, and C major and A minor. Those are the twins that are kind of related to one another. Outside of that, I wish that's all good. Whenever I'm writing a song and I start in a major key, that's the thing I always go to earlier. We talk about that weird Aeolian word. That's the relative minor. If you learn that mode, you'll always know the musical twin that you're using in any given circumstance. And so I always have something that sounds good. But if that's not working, we can go back to the slideshow, if anything. Now, okay. So yeah, on this next slide, this is what we're talking about. Each key has a minor that it's related to. This is a part of memory at first. Later on, you can go through the details of why they're related. But basically, when we're talking about the whole steps and half step patterns and stuff, these are going to be the spots you're looking for. If you can learn a C major chord and you can learn an A minor chord, you always have a major and minor backup plan for one another. You always have a plan B to go to. No, you're good. So each key has one of those minors, and always from that note, our musical alphabet goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Just count up 6 letters from that. C, D, E, F, G. Number 6 would be A. If I went to the next one, D, E, F, G, A, B. Went to the next one, so on and so forth. Count up 6 fingers worth of A, B, C, D, F, G from wherever you're at, and you'll always find the minor that it's related to. And you just go to that point on the MIDI roll, piano roll, and play. So that is the biggest thing that I rely on. Even when I'm writing music with my band, I'll start in a major key, and I'm always going to find the relative minor. And we were working on an idea the other day. Where I can tell by the sound if something's minor. That sounded like super heavy, right? Versus something that sounds super major and happy. So whenever I go through this idea, it kind of has a heavier, darker, metal-y kind of sound. And so that's going to be based off of that minor we're talking about. And it's related back to a major. And so I'm mulching over all this stuff in my head. And when I learn the scales, I go and use those together. And I can come up with endless combinations of notes, arpeggios, chords, scales, all of that.
No, and I was going to add to that I guess the important thing here is to know your scale, know what scale you're in, then understand the different chords that you can play, then the chord progression, because all of this is about building up different notes that you can play with what you've already created, right? And not running out of interesting things to play or repeating them too much, right? So the idea of having a relative minor opens up now a whole nother. I mean, if all you had was the C major scale, the ability to be able to create the chords and the chord progressions, right, as you're moving up or down the scales, now you can add a whole nother set of notes to that, which would be the relative minor, and do the same thing with those, right? Obviously, in the minors, having it a darker feeling, where the undertones are, you know, sadder, and the relative, the major keys feeling a little bit happy.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like a musical yin-yang symbol. You know, it's like the dark to the light, a little bit of dark in the light, a little bit of light in the dark. But yeah, that's absolutely the best way to kind of put it. Is
now the other way
always
to think
other
about
options.
this too also is more options, and then also the type of music that you're playing. So if you're like, let's say, playing house, you're probably going to be in major scales. Why? Because house is disco. Disco has a happy. They want you to dance. They want you moving around, be it, you know, maybe outside of your head, right?
Right.
Whereas if you're doing something like maybe more dubstep or drum and bass, where the tones are, you know, darker, deeper, you have more. It's like more serious. It's not as happy, right? You can start off with your minor scales, and then if there's a part that you need to move into a major scale for a certain, maybe for the drop or another part in the song that you want to make it feel a little less heavy, or you can go into a major scale.
Yeah, it's a good way to transition. Like if you're working on you got a verse, chorus idea, and you need that bridge part, that third thing to just kind of keep it from going A, B, A, B. You know, when I do, especially in Ableton, I kind of do like a Lego blocks. You know, it's just kind of trim everything first, nice, neat little rows and columns, and then I'll kind of go back and figure out, all right, where would a bridge section go, or where can I kind of fade something out or bring something back in or whatever. What he's kind of saying is having knowledge of those other chords. That's exactly what bridges are. Whenever you look at something on a piece of sheet music, 90% of bridges in any sort of pop, hip-hop, dubstep, they're going to be chords that are in the same scale, but just not chords we've used yet, right?
Hey,
It's going to just be a different section.
Can you give me the screen? So, and in general applications, because obviously these ideas are something that he's practiced for 12 years, and so he's got them because, and if you take a music class, that's what they're going to have you do, is go over scales, go over scales, go over scales until your fingers bleed. But what it does is it breeds memory or finger memory or muscle memory into your fingers, so that way you're not really thinking about it as you're doing it. But for all of us who are not 12 years into this, huh? It's only showing the slide. Okay. Let me see. Should be showing us both. You can't see this on at all? Okay. Well, I might yeah, let me get my split screen. Yeah, keep talking. I'm gonna get this going.
The basic idea, like when I go through a MIDI roll and creating parts, I'll sit down and map out. I'm going to show you guys in a little bit how to map out all of this stuff that we're talking about. It's a lot of information that you kind of have to absorb with only certain images we can get up there. But once you get some of that stuff down, and then you're able to, I will write down on paper kind of what my game plan is, and then look at what my verses and choruses are made out of, and see what options I have left inside of this key for other chords to use for a bridge, to use for an outro or an intro or something like that.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to.
No, you're good.
Okay, so all the information that he's been talking about, one of the things that I love to do is knowing that the C major scale starts with the letter C. You can actually see the C there on the piano roll. And I know that it's all the I know that it's all the white keys, right? So what I actually do is I will actually go through and tap in each one of those, right? Now, if you're in Ableton, one of the things that you can actually do is actually move these scales just outside of the loop region that you're actually in. And with Ableton, you can go ahead and hit the letter fold right up here at the top. Now what that does is it actually shows you only the keys that are going to be part of that scale. And now I can sit there and just randomly start. And let's go ahead and play that. And of course, no sound. Now the neat thing about Ableton is that I can grab all of those notes. And I can shift them up or down, right? So I can do that. And then I can actually move them one at a time, which is sort of keeping the notes in the same scale. I'm just playing one octave up.
Well, yeah, and you're also like, if you shift them up, like if you go from the A to B, that's what your modes are. So can you expand that up there where they can see that a little more?
Yeah.
So start back at C. So this would be like my first C to C regular do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But when you go up to D and he shifts up, all I'm doing is taking the exact same ingredients and just bumping everything up one interval, just everything up in relation. But yeah, that's all a mode is. And so whenever you bump the whole thing up, there's your second mode. You went from a D note, we're ending on a D note. If you go up one more, there's your third mode, and you're just starting and ending on different notes that are in C, but they're not C themselves, right? We're ending on an E note in the key of C. So that was perfect. But yeah, even something like that, I'll sit there and try to write something to that. It's up. And I'll try to come up with a phrase, you know, just noodling around or whatever, but I'll start with something like that and then end up knowing where I'm at. That's a great way to be able to see what notes you're playing, what scale you're in, therefore. And then if any of you guys play other instruments, I can then take what I know about the notes and then just apply them on a different instrument and start to build. And you can build pretty quickly. You'd be surprised with some of this stuff how many times I'll sit down at a MIDI roll and just like, oh my God, I cannot seem to figure out what I want to play or what I want to sound. And then I'll go through all this technical stuff and start to build something like a Lego, system like I was talking about. And all of a sudden have a whole song in 2 to 3 minutes, just kind of going through something like that. Have guitar, bass, and any sort of MIDI that I want. And it's just using technical information. I almost now very vaguely will kind of take the inspiration part of it out if I'm struggling in that area.
Could you do the same thing, but play one instrument in one mode and play a different instrument in a different mode?
Yeah, because they're all part of the same key. Yeah,
so you don't have to keep them all in the exact same key. If you might play your guitar in an A minor scale, and then play, let's say, the piano in a major scale, and they're still playing the same notes.
Right, because we're still like the boundaries here still represent ultimately at the end of the day starting and ending on a C note somewhere. It's still in the key of C. So anything that I play on the MIDI or on the keyboard or on the guitar, as long as it's in the key of C, you can mix modes, you can do all kinds of swapping around of different things. So it becomes really, really easy to do over the course of time.
Now, I know we haven't asked a whole lot of questions today, so if there are any questions out there or if there's any questions online that anybody has, please feel free to ask at any time. Just raise your hand.
But yeah, what's up?
Wait for the microphone. Sorry. We want to make sure the people at home hear.
what are some common chord progressions that you like to use?
Sure, that's a great one.
So the question is, go ahead.
Yeah, the question was, what are some common chord progressions? And I think I may have put a slide in here on those. So common keys and common chord progressions, depending on what style of music you like to write. I like to do stuff, anything from jazz to R&B to rock and roll. I mean, so I'm kind of switching it up always. But basically what we talked about earlier, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, numbers, right? You have a 1, 4, 5. That's one of the most standard progressions for pop, blues, rock, hip hop. And so let's think about what is a 1, 4, 5. If I'm in the key of C, C, D, E, F, G, I take the first one, C, the fourth one, F, and the fifth one, G, and I play C, F, G, F, C. And it gives me a boundary of somewhere to start this song. And so that's a perfect question, because different styles will revolve around these different positions we're talking about, all this technical stuff. And so jazz does a lot of 2-5-1. So what the hell is a 2-5-1? Well, we'd have C, D, E, F, G. D is 2, G is 5, and C is 1. So I'd go to a D chord, go to a G chord, and then go to a C chord. And those are like the most cookie cutter forms of something that you're going to hear in radio music, standardized music in a book. But you can kind of take those and make them your own, shuffle the chords around to do an inversion like we talked about, and you still end up with the same kind of result. But yeah, that was a great question, actually. So yeah, like hip hop does a lot of the 6 chord. They're gonna add that relative minor in with a 4 chord, and then a 3 chord, and then a 1 chord. And so depending on like what you're playing with different effects, different tones, that'll sound however you want it to if you're playing around with like plugins and stuff like that. But yeah.
Now, one of the things that happens, I guess, to me a lot is, since I sample and I'm not really a musician, one of the hard things would be to pull what the key is out of the sample that you're using, right? So if you're buying it from a sample bank, most of the time those are going to come already labeled, so they will tell you actually what key the thing or what the root key of it is, and then you can use the information that Caleb has been talking about building around those loops. But what if you've taken it from a song, or you've cut something out of a song? One of my favorite ways to figure out what the root note is to actually take a guitar tuner and put it into the same track that you're playing with. And so let's go ahead. And you can actually see the guitar tuner down there in the bottom corner actually telling me what notes are being played. So from that, you get a collection of the cards that you're shuffling. You can take that back into the information that Caleb is talking about and then start building it around your sample. So then that way your sample actually sounds like it's part of the song that you're working on, as well as all the instrumentation that you're going to add on top of that.
That's an easy way to do it. I do the same thing, but with my guitar. I'll kind of listen, and I'm gonna try to find the root note in there. Like, play that little thing again. I'm gonna try to find the place where you can tell that's where it kind of resolves. Any other note that I play in this scale is just, but we can hear where that settles into place. And so using your ear is going to be a huge help. That's a brilliant way to do it. I honestly never thought of that. There you go, Martin.
I'm not musically inclined.
But yeah, I'll do the same thing, but physically on the guitar. It's that same idea. I might, nope, those aren't it. And I'll go 1 fret at a time if I have to, if I really don't know where I'm at. And then once I find where that note kind of settles, I always think of like a the end or amen kind of sound is what you're looking or listening for something that resolves. So yeah, can we pull that back up to the too far? Yeah, that's where we were. Yeah. Okay, so that goes back to your question of like common chord progressions. Even if you don't know where you are, you can do something like the guitar tuner trick in there. That's awesome, dude. I'm gonna steal that. Yeah, and then see where you are. If as we go through, there's going to be another slide in here. Hold on. There it is. Okay, the circle of fifths. This is a giant map of all music that exists, no matter what style you play, no matter what key you play in, no matter what mode or chord you use, all the stuff that we've talked about that some of you have already forgotten because I talk too much. This is a map of everything. This you can download on your phone. There's plenty of books. I actually have...
There's actually great apps.
Like a couple different books that like help you find the key. It like wheels you around. There's all kinds of helpful stuff. But this thing right here is your roadmap to anything that you want to look at. So what we were talking about earlier is the sharps and flats, the little hashtag symbol and the little B. As you look through here, you notice that different keys have different numbers of sharps or flats in them. These are in the same order every time. They're not meant to trick you. They're not meant to change. They're always going to be in the same spot. So earlier when we were looking, when he was playing that thing on the guitar tuner, I only saw E, F, G, A, B, and C, just regular notes, no sharps or flats. So I know I'm in the key of C because that little diagram at the very top with the treble clef has no sharps and flats in it. However, if I go to a different key, if I go into like the key of G, for instance, you're going to see way up at the top up here, there's going to be that one sharp. You're going to see this one note in your key when you do the guitar tuner trick that's going to have the little hashtag next to it. And if you only see one of them, well, guess what key you're in? You're in the key of G. Same thing with D. You start seeing two, it's always going to be that same thing. Two of them are always going to be the key of D. Three of them will always be the key of A. You can rely on that. It's never going to change or like switch around on you. So if you start noticing certain symbols popping up next to your notes, you're probably in a different key somewhere. The key of C is like we were saying earlier, it's all the white keys. It's just very simple. There's nothing crazy in there at all.
That's why you're not seeing any sharps or flats.
Exactly.
Because all the sharps or flats are going to be black keys.
Exactly, and those are involved in other keys of music themselves. But yeah, that's it.
F sharp is fun to play.
This is my favorite note.
Black keys.
Oh, whoops. So now here is the next part of this. It's a fancy word called diatonic. Diatonics are basically the way of mapping all of this stuff out. We've talked about a lot of stuff. We've talked about keys, chords, scales, inversions, all this stuff, and diatonics kind of wraps all of this stuff together, and it helps you map out where you're going. So let me see, right here, this part where the Roman numerals, you see the major, minor, minor, major, major, relative minor that we talked about earlier, and then diminished. Each one of these is a particular chord that you can literally Google and just memorize the hand position. It's super easy to do. Now, whenever you go through this, a number 2 right here, like the second Roman numeral, is always going to be a minor chord. So if I start in the key of G, starts back over at A, the A chord in the G scale is going to be a minor kind of chord. So I'll need to learn an A minor versus an A major. That's a big difference. And so making sure that you know those different sounds, that can really mess you up. It's the same thing we were doing earlier when I was playing the... If I hit a note out of key, you're going to hear it. And so making sure you learn the proper formats for these chords is going to be highly, highly critical. What's up?
No, so the 1 is the C major scale, all the white keys. The 2 you're saying is the super diatonic, which you're changing.
Supertonic?
Supertonic, sorry.
Yeah.
Which you're changing it into its relative minor, right?
Almost. The relative minor is number 6, but basically all you need to know is that the D, when I make a chord out of the D note and I start to add what are the other notes to make a D chord in the key of C, I have to make a minor chord to make sure that this fits. Later on you'll learn that if I make a D minor chord, it has a D, an F, and an A note. But if I make a D major chord, it has a D, an F sharp, and then if I start playing do, re, mi, nope, that's not the note, that's that F sharp note. It'll screw everything up really, really quickly. So that is why it's important. It kind of touches on what you were saying, but really it's just knowing like number 2, whatever your letters are, the second chord in a major scale is always a minor chord. It's always going to be a minor, dark sounding chord. And they go in that order. They don't ever change. And go ahead.
Sorry, so what would be the difference between a supertonic, let's say a subdominant, dominant? We're looking at the...
So those names were on there because it was in the picture that I put on the slide. But they explain a little bit later on like how harmonies revolve around each other. So just to answer his question, basically we're going to look at tonic C, dominant G, and then subdominant F. Now people typically think sub, Latin, root word meaning under G. So maybe that's why it's under dominant, because it's right behind dominant, so it's subdominant. But really what happens is whenever you invert chords, if I look, a 1 to 5 position is what I call a dominant. It's basically in any given chord, a major chord's a 1, 3, 5, a minor chord's a 1, flat 3, 5, but 5 is in both of them. So it's neutral to major or minor, meaning it's dominant over any kind of chord shape that I have. Now, if I look at that and I go, okay, well from C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 5 spaces. But if I go this way, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, it inverts to the same distance from F, 1, 2, 3, 4 this way, and then switches with G this way to C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 the other way. So they flip-flop around. It goes really deep into music theory. It was just on the picture. Okay. But yeah, that's going to kind of explain how harmonies really work if you're starting to invert them around. C to G one way is 5 spaces, but going backwards is 4, and then it flip-flops with F being 4 and 5. They'll always invert to one another, but that's way later on down the road. And then really like this last part, practice this stuff. I went to the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles, and there were multiple times where I called my mom and said, sorry, I think I'm going to fail. Like I'm coming home, like I did not do what I was supposed to do. And I left class kind of like how you guys are looking at me right now. There's some just like, what the hell does all of this mean? And it took a little while for this stuff to sink in. It takes a little bit of time. Not only it may make sense conceptually, but putting it on the instrument, arming the track, hitting record, and then using this stuff in real time took some time, So what I would encourage you guys to do is there's a website called musictheory.net. And it's literally, we used to use it in our guitar program at the Musicians Institute. And it will walk you step by step through everything we just talked about, every single thing. And so really, it's just giving it some time, being willing, like I said, do it till you're almost foaming at the mouth. Yeah, just burn out on it almost. Really, that's to play anything that I've ever learned. You have to just do it over and over and over. But this is a mental game. Figuring out how to mentally approach your music whenever the feeling isn't there is a big part of working through creative battles. That's where I hit walls all the time, is like I don't always feel music like I want to. I feel like I would, having a good day sort of thing. I pick up the guitar and it just doesn't come out, or I sit down at the MIDI and it doesn't work the way I want to. So I'll have to go through a logical approach towards all of this where I actually have things that I can use to my advantage. But yeah.
No, the other thing I was going to add to that is, if your goal is obviously to be a musician, then you have to follow Caleb's advice, because it is important for you to be able to, play any song that you want to, be able to hear the chords and the progressions. But I think for most of us, we just want to enhance our music a little bit. And I think what you would do is you would maybe do a little research on the genre that you're working in and figure out exactly what kind of chords they play there. Now that you understand that there are things like minors, relative minors, inverting of chords, and try to find out, like he was showing us earlier, what would be the major scales or the major groupings in jazz, or maybe the major groupings in rock. And then you can do a little research, figure out what the major groupings are for the genre that you're playing, and then just learn those scales so to where they become like something that you do without even having to think about it. But not that I think that you would have to learn everything. But
no,
definitely what would be working for within your genre.
Yeah, and it goes back to your question that you had earlier. Is like literally you can Google what are standard chord progressions for blank style of music. What is that? Then it'll tell you, okay, they're going to use a minor, major, minor, diminished, whatever. You can literally just go Google those things. Even if you don't want to take a super logical approach, just scrap it together. You know, kind of fold it together in your own way. Let me see. There's one more slide I wanted to show them. Oh wait, go back down. Right there. Let's see. There we go. But this next slide just kind of describes, whenever he gets it up there, the role of chords and scales. Knowing how they're going to actually perform their jobs in the music is pretty easy to understand. But basically, what I had written down there was chords are typically going to define the rhythm. That thing that's pretty obvious, where the scale is going to create the melody. So if you learn a D minor chord, follow that up with a D minor scale. You have rhythm, you have melody, you now have music, more or less. You can put any kind of beat or whatever you want to behind it. But understanding their roles typically is going to be a huge part of kind of putting all of this stuff together, because it's a lot. It's a lot of information. It's also very dry information, and I get that. It took me a little while to like really freaking love this stuff. But yeah, did you get it? Okay. But basically it just said chords are typically going to define the structure of rhythm, and scales are going to define the structure of the melody. So whenever I go into something and I'm using chords, loop that into something, that's put a drum beat behind it, I got my rhythm. Then I can go back and add a scale. Have a melody that you can sing. That would more or less be the singer singing a lead line. Using their voice.
If you've ever seen a piano player, a good one, they're doing the chords with their left hand, and they're playing all the melody parts with their right hand.
Yeah.
So they'll play major.
Chord melodies is what those are called. Yeah, but it's pretty simple as far as that goes. Strip all the extra stuff back down. Just find a chord you like, and then find that exact same scale. Google it. Get on Google. Okay, I learned a D minor chord. If you don't know it, what's a D minor scale? And then you're good to go. But yeah.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. Are there any other further questions or anything that you would like Caleb to clarify on? Maybe a project that you've been working on that might be that any of this information might work, or maybe you guys play an instrument and you want to ask him a specific question about that. Okay, Caleb?
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for listening. I know, just look into this stuff. It's a lot of information to take in. So yeah, absolutely. Just make sure, get on Google. Musictheory.net is a great resource. This stuff takes some time, and I mean, like, you really have to want to use it. I totally get that. But yeah, it is very effective. I find when I'm not having luck with feeling and inspiration, this is what I turn to, and it typically, more often than not, helps me out. But yeah, if y'all have any questions, even about y'all want me to reiterate something, let me know, even afterwards, all right? But thanks for checking it out. I appreciate it.
Okay, and thank you everybody for coming out. This has been another Pantheon Music Academy production. Today was chords and chords progression. For those, again, who want to follow us online, we do have a Facebook page. This will be available on our Facebook and YouTube later. And don't forget to go to our www.patreon.com/Pantheon Music Academy. That's a tongue twister. All right, thank you very much. Go ahead.